Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into something a little different. An everyday conversation, but with a twist. Instead of the usual small talk, you'll overhear two friends sharing their daily routines in the most unexpected ways. From quirky morning habits to the little details that reveal hidden emotions. This dialogue feels so real, it's like you're sitting right there with them. If you've ever wondered how ordinary routines can uncover extraordinary insights, you're in for a treat. So, grab a cup of tea, get comfy, and let's step into their world together. You know what's weird? I've started setting my alarm for 4:47 a.m. instead of 4:45. 2 minutes doesn't sound like much, but those extra 120 seconds feel like a gift I'm giving to my future self.
That's oddly specific. Why 4:47 though? And why are you awake before the sun even considers existing?
The 47 thing started because my grandmother always said odd numbers bring luck. But more than that, 7 is my favorite digit. It looks confident, like it's leaning into tomorrow. And the early thing, I discovered I'm a completely different person before 6 a.m. Quieter, more honest with myself.
God, I can barely function before 9. I have this whole elaborate routine just to convince my brain to acknowledge reality. First, I lie in bed for exactly 13 minutes, not 12, not 14, listening to my neighbor's cat scratch at something. Then I played this game where I named 3 things I'm curious about that day. Today it was, why do people put pineapple on pizza? Whether that weird stain on my ceiling has grown, and if my coworker Jessica actually likes me or just pretends to.
Wait, back up. 13 minutes? And you actually time it?
My phone timer, yes. It started because I kept hitting snooze in 9-minute intervals, and I realized 9 minutes of half sleep actually makes you groggier. But 13 minutes? That's long enough for your brain to surface from deep sleep without diving back down. It's like controlled procrastination.
That's brilliant. I might steal that. Though my morning thing is different. I write 3 sentences in this notebook before I do anything else. Not journaling exactly, more like capturing whatever weird thought my brain produces when it's still soft from sleep. This morning I wrote, birds probably think humans are terrible at flying, but excellent at making noise. That's actually profound. Do you ever read them back? Sometimes. Last month, I had this phase where every sentence was about food metaphors for emotions. Like, my anxiety tastes like burnt coffee mixed with artificial sweetener. Or, happiness has the texture of warm bread. I think I was going through something.
Food emotions. I get that. I've been doing this thing where I eat my feelings, but literally. Like, when I'm frustrated, I eat something crunchy. Carrots, crackers, those little pretzel sticks. When I'm sad, it has to be something soft, soup, yogurt, mashed potatoes. When I'm nervous, it's mint chocolate chip ice cream always. The combination of cool and warm feelings somehow settles my stomach butterflies. That's not weird at all. Your body knows what it needs. I've been experimenting with eating the same breakfast for 30 days straight to see if it changes how I experience mornings. Day 18. Still cut oats with exactly 7 blueberries and a drizzle of honey that I apply in a clockwise spiral. 7 blueberries. The lucky number thing again?
Partly, but also, I counted once randomly and got 7, and that morning felt perfect. So now I'm testing if consistency creates its own magic, or if I just convince myself it does.
You're conducting breakfast science. I love that. I can't stick to routines like that. My brain rebels. If I eat the same thing 2 days in a row, I feel like I'm betraying some part of myself that needs variety to survive. It's exhausting being this inconsistent, but it also feels honest.
Maybe that's your routine, though, the anti-routine. Some people need chaos to feel centered.
Pauses. I never thought of chaos as centering, but yeah. Like, I have these moments in my day where I deliberately do something slightly unpredictable. Take a different route to work, order something I've never tried, text someone I haven't talked to in months. Yesterday, I complimented a stranger's shoelaces. They were these bright yellow things with tiny sunflowers on, and she smiled so genuinely that it carried me through the entire afternoon.
See, that would terrify me. I need my predictable moments so that when life gets weird, I have something solid to grab onto. But I admire that about you. You're brave in ways I'm not.
It's not bravely, it's more like controlled falling. I've learned that if I create small uncertainties for myself, I'm better at handling the big ones that just happen to you, like training wheels for unpredictability.
That's actually genius. I'm the opposite. I create so much structure that when something unexpected happens, I freeze. Last week, my coffee maker broke, and I genuinely didn't know how to start my day. I stood in my kitchen for 10 minutes, just staring at it like it might resurrect itself.
Did you make coffee another way?
I drove to 3 different places before 6 a.m. looking for the exact type of coffee I usually make. Medium roast, not too acidic, with that specific foam level. I was like a coffee refugee. Finally found a place, but the whole experience made me realize how fragile my sense of normalcy actually is.
But maybe that's not a bad thing. Like, maybe your routines aren't prisons. They're more like safe houses, places you can return to when the world gets too loud.
I like that metaphor. Safe houses. Yeah, that feels right. What about you? Do you have any safe houses hidden in all that beautiful chaos?
Thinks. Reading before bed. Always. Even if I'm exhausted, even if it's just a few pages of whatever's on my nightstand, there's something about ending each day by entering someone else's world that makes my own problems feel more manageable. Like, no matter how strange or difficult my day was, there are these stories waiting for me that are stranger and more difficult, and somehow that's comforting.
What kind of stories?
Everything. Last week I finished this book about a woman who could taste colors, and now I'm reading about a detective who solves murders by interpreting people's dreams. I gravitate toward books where reality bends a little bit. Regular life is already weird enough. I want my fiction to acknowledge that and push it further.
I'm the opposite again. I read nonfiction almost exclusively, biographies, science, history. I like reading about real people doing extraordinary things within the constraints of actual reality. This month, I'm reading about this mathematician who revolutionized how we understand infinity. She worked in complete obscurity for decades and then suddenly became famous at 78.
That gives me hope. Like, maybe all the weird little things we're doing now, your breakfast experiments, my chaos training, maybe they're preparing us for something we can't see yet.
Exactly. Or maybe they're just how we stay sane in a world that asks us to be normal when normal doesn't really exist.
You know what's funny? This conversation is probably the most honest I've been about my daily life in months. Usually when people ask about routines, I give some generic answer about coffee and checking emails.
Same. I never tell people about the 447 thing or the sentence writing. It sounds too deliberate, like I'm trying too hard to be interesting.
But that's the thing. We're not trying to be interesting. We're trying to be functional. We're trying to be ourselves in a world that has no manual for how to do that.
And maybe that's what makes it interesting. The fact that we're all just making it up as we go along, creating these tiny rituals and experiments to help us navigate being human.
I'm going to remember this conversation tomorrow morning during my 13-minute ceiling stain contemplation.
And I'll think about it at 4:47 when I'm writing my 3 weird sentences in the dark.
Here's to the beautiful strangeness of ordinary days.
And to the people brave enough to live them authentically. I've been wondering if you can inherit loneliness, the way you inherit your grandmother's china or your father's terrible sense of direction. Because I wake up every morning at 6:23, not 6:20, not 6:30, and the first thing I feel isn't tiredness or hunger or even the need to pee. It's this hollow space right behind my ribs, like someone carved out a small cave there while I was sleeping.
That's heavy for a Tuesday afternoon. But 6:23 is oddly specific. Is there a story there?
My mom used to wake me up at 6:23 when I was little because she said 6:20 was too round, too expected, and kids need to learn that life doesn't happen on neat schedules. She'd whisper, irregular wake-up call, like it was some kind of secret code. I kept doing it after she died, I guess. But now I think maybe she was just trying to give me 3 extra minutes of sleep without admitting she was being soft.
Shifts in her chair. Wow. That's beautiful and heartbreaking. I have this thing where I can't start my day until I've apologized to my plants. All 7 of them. Individual apologies for whatever I might do wrong that day. Overwatering, underwatering, forgetting to rotate them toward the light. My therapist says I'm projecting my anxiety about disappointing people onto vegetation, but I think plants are just better listeners than most humans.
You apologized to plants. That's either the sweetest or most neurotic thing I've heard this week. What do you actually say to them?
Okay, don't judge me, but I have names for all of them, and I tailor the apologies. Like Gerald, he's my fiddly fig. He gets, sorry if I hovered too much today, buddy. I know you need space to do your photosynthesis thing. And Beatrice, my spider plant, she gets something like, forgive me if I forget you exist for 3 days and then suddenly obsess over whether your soil is the right pH.
Gerald and Beatrice, you've created a whole plant therapy session that's actually brilliant. I talk to my mirror, but it's less apologetic and more investigative. Every morning I ask my reflection 3 questions. What are you hiding? What do you need today? And what would happen if you told the truth about something that matters?
And you answer them?
Sometimes. The hiding question usually gets something practical, like I'm hiding that I haven't done laundry in 2 weeks and I'm wearing a bathing suit under my dress because it's literally the only clean underwear I have left. But the truth question, that one's dangerous. Last week, I admitted out loud that I've been in love with my coworker Marcus for 8 months, and I could actually see my face change in the mirror. Like watching yourself realize something you already knew but weren't ready to know.
Wait, what? You're in love with Marcus? The Marcus who brings those weird protein balls to work? Since when do you not tell me these things?
Since I realized that saying it out loud makes it real, and making it real means I had to decide what to do about it. I've been living in this comfortable space where I can just enjoy the feeling without any consequences. Like being hungry, but knowing there's good food in the fridge. The anticipation is sometimes better than actually eating.
That's actually a terrible metaphor because eventually you have to eat or you die. But I get it. I've been doing something similar with this pottery class I keep almost signing up for. I've had the registration page bookmarked for 4 months. I read the course description every Tuesday. I've researched the instructor. I even drove by the studio twice. But I haven't clicked enroll because as long as it's still possible, I can imagine myself being good at it.
What's stopping you? I mean, besides the fear of discovering you have no artistic talent whatsoever?
Grimaces. Exactly that. But also, my hands shake when I'm nervous, and pottery seems like something that requires steady hands. What if I spend $300 to learn that my anxiety has physical limitations I can't overcome? What if the other students are all naturally gifted and I'm the one person who can't make a bowl without it collapsing?
But what if you're amazing at it? What if shaky hands actually make more interesting pottery because they add character and unpredictability?
You sound like my plant apologies. Very optimistic. Speaking of which, I've started incorporating my daily failures into the routine. After I apologize to the plants, I spend 5 minutes listing everything I did wrong the previous day. But then I have to reframe each failure as information rather than judgment.
Like how?
Yesterday, I burned my dinner because I got distracted reading articles about whether cats can sense earthquakes before they happen. Don't ask why, it was a rabbit hole situation. So instead of speaker 2, you're an idiot who can't cook pasta without adult supervision, I reframed it as speaker 2 learned that when you're researching random animal facts, you need to set multiple timers. And also that slightly burnt pasta is still edible if you scrape off the worst parts. That's actually genius. I should try that with my mirror questions. Maybe add a fourth one.
What did you learn about yourself yesterday that you can use today?
Yes! But here's the weird part. I've noticed that my plant conversations have gotten more sophisticated. Like, I started just apologizing, but now Gerald and I have full discussions about growth patterns and seasonal changes. Yesterday, I told him about my pottery anxiety, and I swear his leaves rustled in a supportive way.
Grins. You're having therapy sessions with houseplants, and I'm conducting daily interrogations of my own reflection. We're both clearly handling adulthood really well.
At least we're creative about our coping mechanisms. My sister just stress cleans her apartment at 2 a.m. and pretends that's normal.
Speaking of creative coping, I've been doing this thing where I assign each day of the week a different personality and try to match my behavior to it. Monday is determined, but slightly pessimistic, so I tackle the worst tasks first. Tuesday is curious and scattered, which is perfect for research and following random interests. Wednesday is steady and reliable, so I handle all my responsible adult tasks then.
What's today?
Tuesday, which explains why we're having this weirdly deep conversation about plant therapy and mirror interrogations instead of discussing weekend plans or complaining about work like normal people.
I love Tuesday you. What's Friday like?
Friday is generous and slightly reckless. Friday me buys coffee for strangers, texts people I haven't talked to in months, and makes impulsive decisions that Monday me has to deal with. Last Friday, I signed up for a salsa dancing class, bought a cactus I definitely don't have room for, and told my landlord that his new haircut made him look distinguished instead of just nodding politely like I usually do.
A cactus? Please tell me you named it.
Rodriguez. He's very stoic and judgmental. I think he disapproves of my watering schedule, but cacti are supposed to be low maintenance, so I'm choosing to interpret his silence as approval.
Rodriguez and Gerald should meet. I bet they'd have interesting conversations about human caretaking and competence.
Laughs. We could arrange plant playdates. But seriously, this whole week personality thing has helped me understand that I'm not inconsistent. I'm just complex enough to need different approaches for different types of days. Some days require the steady focus of Wednesday me, and some days need Friday me's willingness to take risks.
That's beautiful. I might steal that idea, but adapt it for my plants. Like, maybe Monday is Gerald Day for serious growth discussions, and Friday is Beatrice Day for celebrating her new baby spider plantlets.
You realize we're both creating elaborate systems to have conversations with non-human entities about our feelings, right?
And at least plants and mirrors don't give unsolicited advice or try to fix our problems. They just listen and reflect back what we need to hear.
True. When I ask my mirror what I'm hiding, it's not judging me for having secrets. It's just asking me to be honest about them. When you apologize to Gerald, you're not actually worried about disappointing a plant. You're practicing self-compassion.
Exactly. It's like safe emotional rehearsal. I can work through my anxieties with Gerald without risking actual human rejection or judgment.
And I can practice telling the truth to my mirror without the immediate consequences of telling it to another person. Although, speaking of telling the truth, I think I might actually be ready to do something about the Marcus situation.
Really? What kind of something?
Maybe Friday me will figure it out. She's braver than Tuesday me, and definitely braver than Monday me. I'm thinking I might casually suggest we grab coffee after work, but frame it as a Tuesday curiosity experiment rather than a Friday reckless decision.
And I might finally click enroll on that pottery class. Maybe I'll tell Gerald about it first. Get his leafy blessing.
Look at us, using our weird daily rituals to actually make positive changes instead of just maintaining comfortable stagnation.
Is this what emotional growth looks like? Because it feels messier and more plant-based than I expected.
I think growth is supposed to be messy. Clean, linear progress is probably just what we tell ourselves should happen to avoid dealing with the actual complicated reality of being human.
You know what I realized? All these routines we've created. The mirror questions, the plant apologies, the weak personalities. They're all basically ways of creating structure around uncertainty. Like, we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we approach each day.
And how we talk to ourselves about it. My mirror questions aren't really about getting answers. They're about staying curious about my own life instead of just sleepwalking through it.
And my plant conversations aren't about the plants. They're about practicing kindness with myself. If I can extend patience and understanding to Gerald when he drops leaves, maybe I can extend the same grace to myself when I mess up.
We're basically conducting daily experiments in self-awareness disguised as quirky habits.
Which sounds much more sophisticated than I talk to plant houses because I'm anxious.
Smiles. Here's to Tuesday curiosity, plant therapy, mirror honesty, and the beautiful weirdness of trying to figure out how to be human.
And to Friday you asking Marcus for coffee. And to me finally making a bowl that doesn't collapse under pressure.
Deal. But I want weekly updates on Gerald's progress and Rodriguez's ongoing judgment of my life choices.
Obviously. And I want to know if your mirror starts giving different answers when you start taking action on the truth questions.
It's a deal. Who knew that the architecture of ordinary days could be so architectural?
Everything's architecture if you pay enough attention to how the pieces fit together.
I've been collecting the sounds my apartment makes at different times of day. Not recording them, just cataloging them in this notebook. Like at 3:17 a.m., the refrigerator makes this low humming that sounds almost like singing. And at 7:42, the floorboard by my bedroom door creaks in B flat when I step on it. I think I'm accidentally creating a symphony of my own loneliness.
That's either deeply artistic or a sign you need more human interaction. Maybe both. I can't decide if you're a genius or losing your mind in the most beautiful way possible.
Probably both. But here's the thing. I realized I was doing it because silence makes me panic. Not the absence of sound, but the wrong kind of silence. When my upstairs neighbor moved out last month, suddenly I lost the sound of her walking around at midnight, and it felt like losing a friend I never actually met.
Oh, God, I totally understand that. I have this ritual where I eavesdrop on my downstairs neighbor's phone calls through the heating vent. Not intentionally creepy, I just discovered that if I'm washing dishes at exactly 8 p.m., I can hear this woman having the most wonderfully mundane conversations with what I think is her sister. They discuss grocery lists and argue about whether their mother needs reading glasses. It's better than any podcast.
You're living vicariously through over her domesticity. That's actually kind of sweet. Do you ever worry they'll move? Constantly, which is insane because I've never even seen this person's face, but I've become emotionally invested in her relationship drama. Last week, she was crying about someone named Derek, and I genuinely considered baking cookies and leaving them outside her door with a note that just said, "Derek doesn't deserve you." But then I realized that would cross the line from quirky into stalker territory. The fact that you considered it but didn't do it proves you're still sane. Barely, but still. I've been doing something similar, but with smells instead of sounds. I keep a running list of what my building smells like at different times. Tuesday mornings are always burnt coffee and someone's vanilla candle. Thursday evenings smell like curry and fabric softener. But Sundays? Sundays smell like regret and leftover pizza, which is weirdly specific, but surprisingly accurate. Smells have emotional memories attached. My therapist, yes, I have one, don't look at me like that, she says I'm hyper-aware of environmental details because I'm trying to create stability in a world that feels unpredictable, which sounds very professional and reasonable, but really I think I just like knowing what to expect from my Tuesday mornings. You have a therapist who analyzes your eavesdropping habits? I love that. What else do you talk about? Well, there's this thing I do every morning where I have to touch 7 different textures before I can leave my apartment. It started accidentally. I was running late and grabbed my keys, wallet, lip balm, hair tie, phone, jacket zipper, and doorknob. And somehow that combination felt complete. Now, if I don't hit my texture quota, the whole day feels unbalanced.
What are your 7 textures today?
Let's see. Smooth ceramic coffee mug, rough denim jacket, soft cotton shirt sleeve, cold metal keychain, plastic lip balm tube, and the fuzzy hair tie I keep on my wrist. It has to be in that order or I start over.
That's incredibly specific, but I get it. I have a thing with numbers that show up in my daily routine. I count steps between certain landmarks, and if I don't hit the right numbers, I feel like I've broken some invisible contract with the universe. Like it's exactly 43 steps from my front door to the coffee shop. And if I take 42 or 44, I convince myself the barista will get my order wrong.
And does she get it wrong when you mess up the steps?
Actually, no. Which should probably tell me something about the validity of my supernatural step counting theory, but I keep doing it anyway because the alternative is accepting that most things are random, and I'm not ready for that level of existential chaos.
I totally understand that. My texture thing isn't really about the textures. It's about having some small way to feel in control when everything else feels like it's happening to me rather than because of my choices.
Exactly. Speaking of control, I've been experimenting with eating foods in color order. Not every meal, but when I'm feeling particularly scattered, I'll arrange my food from lightest to darkest and eat it in sequence. Yesterday's lunch was vanilla yogurt, yellow bell pepper, orange cheese, red apple, dark chocolate. It's weirdly meditative.
That sounds like a very organized way to have a breakdown. I admire the aesthetic commitment. I do something similar, but with getting dressed. I have to put on clothes in the order of how long they'll last. Underwear first because it's closest to my skin and will be worn longest, then shirt, then pants, then socks, then shoes. If I put socks on before pants, I feel like I violated some natural law of layering.
The natural law of layering. I love that. It's like we're both creating these elaborate systems to impose order on the inherent messiness of being alive.
Right? And the weird part is that these systems actually work, not because they have any real power over the universe, but because they give us frameworks for moving through the day with intention instead of just reacting to whatever happens.
Have you ever tried breaking your own rules intentionally just to see what happens?
Shifts uncomfortably. Once, I deliberately put on socks before pants, skipped 2 of my textures, and left my apartment without checking that my neighbor was having her usual phone call. I felt anxious all day, but nothing terrible happened.
Actually, I had a really good conversation with a stranger at the bus stop because I was so off-kilter that I forgot to be socially anxious.
That's fascinating. So breaking your routine made you more spontaneous, but at the cost of feeling grounded.
Exactly. It's like my rituals are training wheels for emotional stability, but sometimes training wheels keep you from learning how to balance on your own.
I tried something similar with my step counting. I deliberately took 45 steps to the coffee shop by walking slower, and the barista actually complimented my earrings, which never happens. But I spent the entire rest of the day convinced that one compliment was compensation for some terrible thing that was about to happen.
Your brain really doesn't want to give up the idea that step counting controls the universe.
My brain is very committed to magical thinking, apparently. But you know what I realized? These habits we have, they're not just about control, they're about attention. Like when I'm cataloging the sounds in my apartment, I'm actually learning to pay attention to my environment in a way that makes me feel connected to it instead of just existing inside it.
Yes. When I'm touching my 7 textures, I'm not just performing a ritual. I'm starting my day by engaging with the physical world intentionally. It's like a daily reminder that I have a body and it exists in space and can interact with things.
And when I count steps or eat foods in color order, I'm practicing focus and sequence and pattern recognition. It's like meditation disguised as obsessive behavior.
Or obsessive behavior that accidentally became meditation. Either way, we're probably more mindful than people who just sleepwalk through their morning routines.
True. Although I wonder sometimes if we're being mindful or just anxious with good organizational skills.
Grins. Can't it be both? Maybe anxiety isn't always a bug. Maybe sometimes it's a feature that makes us pay closer attention to details other people miss.
I like that. My anxiety as a hyper-vigilant superpower rather than a character flaw. Like yesterday, I noticed that the woman at the grocery store checkout was wearing earrings that didn't match. And instead of judging it, I realized it was probably intentional and actually looked really cool. My step counting brain is apparently also my pattern noticing brain.
Exactly. My texture-obsessed hands are really good at noticing when fabrics are high quality or when someone's handshake reveals something about their confidence level. The same sensitivity that makes me need 7 specific touches every morning also makes me good at reading subtle social cues.
So maybe we're not weird. We're just operating with more sensory data than most people, and we've had to develop systems to process it all without getting overwhelmed.
That's the most generous interpretation of our quirks I've ever heard, and I'm choosing to believe it completely. Good, because I have another confession. I've started writing letters to my future self at different time intervals. Like on Sunday, I write a letter to Wednesday me about what I hope she'll have figured out by then. On Wednesday, I write back to Sunday me about whether her predictions were accurate. It's like having a correspondence with myself across time.
That's actually brilliant. What kinds of things do you predict?
Small stuff mostly. Sunday me predicted that Wednesday me would finally organize the closet and figure out how to approach this work project I've been avoiding. Wednesday me had to write back and admit she reorganized her bookshelf instead and made a detailed plan for the work project without actually starting it. But she discovered a new coffee shop that plays jazz music at exactly the right volume.
So, Sunday you is optimistic about productivity, and Wednesday you is more realistic about how you actually spend your energy.
Right? But the weird thing is that Friday me is always surprisingly wise about what Monday me will need to hear. Like last Friday, I wrote, "Don't apologize for taking up space this week." And Monday me really needed that reminder before a meeting where I normally would have spent the whole time trying to make myself smaller.
You're creating a support system out of your own different emotional states. That's like advanced self-care.
What about you? Any other elaborate coping mechanisms I should know about?
Okay, this is going to sound strange, but I've been having conversations with the city. Like, when I'm walking around, I silently ask the neighborhood questions and then pay attention to what I notice next, as if it's an answer. Yesterday, I asked, "What do I need to know about change?" and immediately saw a tree that was half green leaves and half autumn colors, which felt like the universe saying, things can be in transition and still be beautiful. You're having philosophical discussions with urban environments. That's either deeply spiritual or a sign you should consider moving somewhere with more nature. Maybe both, but it works. I feel less alone when I'm walking around, and I've started noticing things I never would have seen before. Like, there's a house on Maple Street where someone changes the wreath on their door every week. And now I look forward to seeing what theme they've chosen. This week, it's tiny sunflowers arranged in a spiral pattern.
See, that's what I love about our weird habits. They force us to pay attention to details that make ordinary life more interesting. Most people walk past that door and see a generic decoration, but you see someone's weekly creative project.
And your sound cataloging means you're actually listening to your environment instead of just existing in it. You know your apartment's personality.
Exactly. We're like anthropologists studying our own lives, finding patterns and meaning in places other people might just see routine or randomness.
Do you think other people have secret systems like this? Or are we just the ones willing to admit it?
I think everyone has something, but most people probably don't talk about it because it sounds crazy when you say it out loud. Like, my coworker Sarah always organizes her desk in the same specific way every morning, but she'd probably just call it being organized rather than performing a daily ritual that helps me feel in control of my workspace.
Right. We're just more aware that our habits are habits and more intentional about what purpose they serve.
Which might make us more conscious about how we move through the world, even if it also makes us sound like we need therapy.
Well, I already have therapy, and you have your time traveling letter system. We're covered.
Here's to strange daily rituals that keep us sane, sensory awareness that doubles as anxiety management, and finding magic in the mundane details everyone else ignores.
And to neighbors we'll never meet, but whose lives we secretly care about. And to cities that answer our questions if we know how to listen.
I've been stealing moments, not in a criminal way, more like collecting tiny pieces of time that nobody else wants. Like the 17 seconds between when my alarm goes off and when I actually have to acknowledge that morning exists. I've learned to stretch those 17 seconds into what feels like an entire conversation with myself about whether today deserves my participation.
That's weirdly profound. I do something similar, but with physical spaces. I have this spot behind the coffee machine at work where I can stand for exactly 90 seconds without anyone noticing I'm not being productive. I call it my reset button. Yesterday, I used it 4 times because Karen from accounting kept asking me to explain things I'd already explained twice.
A reset button. I love that. Mine happens in the shower, but it's not about getting clean. I've timed it perfectly, so I have 3 minutes and 47 seconds of hot water hitting my back before I have to start the actual washing routine. During those minutes, I pretend I'm standing under a waterfall somewhere tropical, and I mentally rehearse conversations I'll never have the courage to actually start.
What kind of conversations?
Hesitates. Mostly with my dad. He died when I was 15, but I still need to tell him things, you know? In the shower, I update him on my life, like he's been away on a really long business trip. Yesterday, I told him about this promotion I'm probably not going to get and how I bought groceries for the elderly woman next door because her son never visits. I imagine he's proud of me for the small kindnesses, but disappointed that I'm not braver about the big opportunities.
That's beautiful, Speaker One. Does he ever talk back?
Sometimes. His voice sounds like hot water and steam, if that makes sense, warm and enveloping. He usually just says things like, "You're doing fine, kiddo," or "Trust yourself more." Basic dad stuff, but it feels real enough that I've started making decisions based on what I think he'd advise.
I have conversations with future me, but they're less comforting and more like arguments. Every night before bed, I imagine myself 10 years from now, and she's usually pretty annoyed with current me's choices. Future speaker 2 is always like, "Why did you spend 40 minutes scrolling through videos of cats wearing tiny hats instead of working on that freelance project?" And I'm like, "Because the cats were really cute and the project is terrifying."
Does future you ever win these arguments?
Rarely, but sometimes she makes good points that stick with me. Like last week, she asked me why I was so afraid of writing badly that I wasn't writing at all. And I realized I'd rather produce mediocre work than produce nothing. So I started this thing where I write exactly one paragraph every morning about whatever I dreamed the night before, even if the dream was boring or weird or made no sense.
Dream paragraphs, that's brilliant. What was today's dream about?
I dreamed I was a librarian in a library where all the books were empty, but people kept checking them out anyway and returning them satisfied, like they'd read amazing stories. I spent the whole dream trying to figure out what they were seeing that I couldn't. The paragraph I wrote this morning was about how maybe the best stories are the ones we tell ourselves to fill in the blank spaces.
That's actually profound. Dreams are weird like that. They feel important while you're having them, but then you try to explain them and they sound ridiculous. I've started keeping a glass of water next to my bed, specifically for the moment I wake up, because there's something about drinking cold water while your brain is still soft from sleep that helps me remember dream details I'd otherwise lose.
The brain being soft from sleep. I love that description. It's like there's a brief window where your subconscious is still partially in charge and might accidentally tell you something true about yourself.
Exactly. Yesterday, I woke up from a dream where I was teaching a cooking class, which is insane because I can barely make toast without burning it. But when I drank my water and thought about it, I realized the dream wasn't about cooking. It was about wanting to share knowledge and help people learn things. Maybe I should look into tutoring or mentoring instead of assuming I need to be a chef to fulfill that urge.
See, that's what I mean about dreams filling in blank spaces. Your subconscious figured out what you actually want and just used cooking as a metaphor because that's the language dreams speak.
Speaking of languages, I've been conducting experiments with how I talk to myself throughout the day. Like, I noticed that my internal voice is incredibly mean to me, constantly criticizing and catastrophizing. So I started deliberately changing the tone. Instead of, "You're going to mess this up," I try, "This is challenging and you're figuring it out." It sounds simple, but it's surprisingly hard to change a voice you've been listening to for 26 years.
That's like retraining your brain's default settings. I've been doing something similar, but with questions instead of statements. Instead of making declarations about what's going to happen, I ask myself questions like, what if this works out better than expected? Or what would I try if I knew I couldn't fail? It tricks my brain into being more creative about solutions instead of just predicting disasters.
Ooh, I like that. Questions open up possibilities instead of shutting them down. I might steal that technique from my shower conversations with Dad. Instead of telling him about problems, I could ask him what he thinks I should try.
Yes, and maybe future me will be less annoyed if I'm asking her for advice instead of just defending my questionable life choices to her.
Laughs. We're both having complex emotional relationships with imaginary versions of people. That's either very creative or concerning.
Probably both, but honestly, I'd rather have rich inner conversations with fictional people than shallow, real conversations with actual people who don't really want to know how I'm doing.
God, yes. Like when people ask, "How are you?" and they clearly want you to say, "Fine," so they can move on with their day. I've started giving different types of honest answers to see what happens. Yesterday, someone asked how I was, and I said, "Optimistically confused." and they actually stopped and asked what that meant.
What did you tell them?
That I'm confused about most aspects of my life, but I'm optimistic that the confusion is leading somewhere interesting rather than just being random chaos. We ended up talking for 20 minutes about how uncertainty can be exciting instead of just scary. It was the most real conversation I'd had all week.
I love optimistically confused as a life philosophy. I might need to borrow that. Usually, when people ask how I am, I say something like creatively overwhelmed or productively procrastinating, which either confuses them or makes them laugh.
Those are perfect, honest, but not traumatizing for the other person. I've been collecting these little phrases that describe complex, emotional states more accurately than fine or busy. Like, sometimes I'm nostalgic for things that haven't happened yet, or homesick for places I've never been. Those are beautiful. I get homesick for places I've never been. It's like missing the life you might have had if you'd made different choices. I feel that way every time I see pictures of small towns with bookshops and cafes, even though I've never lived anywhere like that. Exactly. Or sometimes I'm grateful for problems I don't have to solve today, which sounds weird, but it's actually a very specific kind of contentment. Like, I'm glad I don't have to figure out what to do about climate change or world hunger right now. I just have to decide what to have for lunch and whether to respond to that text from my ex.
That's actually a very healthy way to think about responsibility. You can care about big problems without carrying them all on your shoulders every single day. Speaking of texts from exes, I've developed a 24-hour rule where I have to wait a full day before responding to any message that makes my stomach feel weird.
Ooh, that's smart. What happens during the 24 hours?
Usually my perspective shifts completely. Like, the message that seemed urgent or emotionally loaded at 9 p.m. feels much more manageable at 9 p.m. the next day. I've realized that my immediate emotional reactions are often about who I used to be in that relationship, not who I actually am now.
That's incredibly wise. I need a rule like that, but for email. I have this terrible habit of reading work emails right before bed, and then I lie awake catastrophizing about things that are probably not even problems. Last night, I convinced myself that my boss's casual, "Can we chat tomorrow?" meant I was getting fired, and I mentally prepared my entire defense speech before realizing I was being insane.
Your brain wrote a whole workplace drama based on 4 words. That's impressive in a very stressful way. I do the same thing with social interactions. Someone will make an innocuous comment, and I'll spend hours analyzing their tone and facial expression and what they might have really meant. Yes. And then you realize you've created an entire fictional narrative about how they secretly hate you based on the fact that they said sure instead of absolutely when you suggested meeting for coffee.
Exactly. I've started calling it emotional fiction writing, and now when I catch myself doing that, I try to write the story down as if it's a creative exercise instead of reality. It helps me see how dramatic and unrealistic my assumptions usually are.
That's brilliant. Turn anxiety into entertainment. I might try that with my catastrophic email interpretations. Write them out like soap opera plots and see how ridiculous they sound on paper.
Right? Like in today's episode, Speaker 2 becomes convinced that her client's request for minor revisions actually means her work is terrible and her career is over, leading to a spiral of self-doubt that somehow connects to her fear of not being good enough for her high school boyfriend who broke up with her 7 years ago.
Laughing. Perfect. Meanwhile, Speaker 1 interprets her landlord's friendly wave as a sinister signal that he's planning to raise her rent, causing her to research apartments she can't afford and mentally pack all her belongings before realizing he was just being polite.
We should write a sitcom about people who overthink normal human interactions. It would be very relatable to anxious millennials.
Emotional fiction writers could be the title. But you know what's funny? Having conversations like this makes me realize that everyone is probably making up stories about what other people are thinking. And most of those stories are probably wrong.
Which means all our social anxiety is basically just a clash of competing fictional narratives that nobody is brave enough to fact-check by actually communicating directly.
Right, like I could solve 90% of my workplace stress by just asking my boss, hey, when you said we should chat, is this about something serious or just a regular check-in? But instead, I'll write a 3-act drama about my impending unemployment.
And I could save myself hours of analyzing by asking my friends, did I say something that bothered you? Instead of replaying every conversation looking for clues that they're annoyed with me.
It's like we're all living in parallel universes of assumption, instead of just existing in the same reality and talking about it.
Maybe that's what growing up actually means. Learning to fact-check your emotional fiction before treating it as documentary truth.
I like that. And maybe learning to be comfortable with the fact that other people are also making up stories about you, and most of those stories probably aren't as interesting or critical as you think they are.
Right. Most people are too busy writing their own emotional fiction to spend much time editing yours.
You know what's weird? This whole conversation started with me talking about stealing 17 seconds from my morning, and now we're discussing the entire architecture of human social anxiety. How did we get here?
I think we got here because those 17 seconds you steal are actually moments of truth, and truth has a way of expanding into bigger truths if you pay attention to it.
And your reset button behind the coffee machine is really about creating space for authenticity in a world that doesn't leave much room for it.
So maybe all our weird little daily habits are actually ways of staying connected to ourselves in a world that's constantly asking us to perform being someone else.
Here's to stolen moments, reset buttons, shower conversations with ghosts, and the courage to write better stories about our own lives.
And to asking questions instead of making assumptions. And to friends who understand that optimistically confused is a perfectly valid way to be.
I've been practicing dying. Not in a morbid way, more like rehearsing for the moment when I won't exist anymore so I can figure out what actually matters while I'm still here. Every Tuesday at 4:30 p.m., I lie on my living room floor for exactly 12 minutes and try to imagine what it would feel like if this was my last conscious moment. What would I regret not saying? What would I wish I'd paid more attention to? Jesus, Speaker One, that's intense. What brought this on? Are you okay? I'm fine, I think. It started after my grandmother died last month. At her funeral, I realized I'd never asked her about the scar on her thumb or why she always hummed while doing dishes. All these tiny details that made her uniquely herself, and they're just gone now. So I figured if I practice being dead, maybe I'll get better at being alive.
That's actually beautiful in a really dark way. What do you discover during your 12 minutes of death practice?
Mostly that I waste ridiculous amounts of mental energy worrying about things that won't matter at all when I'm gone. Like last Tuesday, I realized I've spent probably 40 hours total this year obsessing over whether my coworker thinks I'm competent. And if I were dying right now, that would feel completely meaningless. But the way sunlight looks when it hits the dust particles floating in my living room, that would feel important.
Dust particles over job performance anxiety. I get that. I've been doing something kind of similar, but instead of practicing death, I've been practicing being a different version of myself. Every morning, I spend 10 minutes pretending I'm the person I would be if I wasn't afraid of anything. Fearless me makes different choices. She wears the weird vintage dress I bought but never wore. She speaks up in meetings. She texts people first instead of waiting for them to reach out.
Do you actually do the things fearless you would do, or just imagine them?
Both, weirdly. sometimes I can only imagine being brave, but sometimes the imagining gives me just enough momentum to actually do it. Yesterday, fearless me wanted to ask my upstairs neighbor if he could practice his trumpet at a different time, and I was so committed to the role play that I actually knocked on his door. Turns out he had no idea he was being loud and was super apologetic about it.
So you're method acting your way into courage. That's genius. I might try that during my death practice. Instead of just focusing on what I'd regret, I could imagine what the fearless version of dying me would want current me to do with the time I had left.
Yes, like dying you probably doesn't care if you embarrass yourself trying new things because embarrassment is temporary, but regret is, well, eternal if you're dead.
Right. Dead me would be like, why didn't you take that pottery class? Who cares if your bowls look like wonky ashtrays? At least you would have had clay under your fingernails and learned something about your hands.
Exactly. And fearless me is constantly annoyed with regular me for staying home instead of going to events alone. She's like, what's the worst that could happen? You stand awkwardly by the snack table, so what? At least you'd be standing awkwardly somewhere new.
You know what's weird? I think my death practice has made me more aware of how much I perform being alive instead of actually living. Like, I spend so much energy trying to appear like I have my life together that I forget to actually figure out what I want my life to be.
Yes, that's what fearless me keeps pointing out. She's like, you're so busy managing everyone else's impression of you that you've never asked yourself what you actually enjoy. Last week, she made me try 5 different types of tea at this fancy tea shop just because I'd always wondered about them but felt too self-conscious to ask for samples.
What did you discover about tea?
That I love this smoky black tea called Lapsang Souchong, which tastes like a campfire in liquid form, and that I hate anything with bergamot, even though I thought I was supposed to like Earl Grey because it sounds sophisticated. But more importantly, I discovered that curiosity feels better than performing sophistication.
Curiosity feels better than performing sophistication. I need to write that down. During my death practice yesterday, I realized I've been performing the role of person who has her finances figured out while actually having no idea where my money goes each month. Dead me would definitely want current me to stop pretending and actually learn about budgeting.
Are you going to do it? Learn about budgeting?
I already started. Turns out I spend an embarrassing amount on coffee shop visits that I don't even enjoy. I just like the ritual of ordering something and feeling like I belong somewhere. So now I'm experimenting with making elaborate coffee at home and seeing if I can create the same sense of ritual without the overpriced, mediocre lattes.
That's such a perfect example of what you were saying about performing life. You were performing person who goes to coffee shops instead of asking what you actually wanted from the experience.
Right. And the weird part is that making coffee at home has become this whole meditation thing. I grind the beans, time the brewing, froth the milk with this little whisk I bought. It takes longer than just buying coffee, but the time feels intentional instead of just consumed.
I love that. Intentional time versus consumed time. Fearless Me has been pushing me to notice the difference. Like I used to scroll through social media for what felt like 5 minutes, but was actually 45 minutes of my life disappearing into other people's curated moments. Now I set a timer for 10 minutes of scrolling, and when it goes off, I have to consciously decide if I want to trade more of my life for more scrolling. Do you usually keep scrolling? Sometimes, but now it feels like a choice instead of just something that happens to me. And weirdly, knowing I'm choosing to waste time makes the time feel less wasted. Like, if I decide to spend 20 minutes looking at pictures of people's pets, at least I'm owning that decision instead of pretending it just accidentally happened.
That's brilliant. Intentional time wasting versus accidental time wasting. I'm going to steal that concept. Actually, that reminds me, during my death practice, I've started categorizing my daily activities into things dead me would approve of and things dead me would find baffling. The results are illuminating.
Give me examples.
Dead me would approve of the 30 minutes I spent last weekend helping my elderly neighbor carry her groceries upstairs, and the hour I spent reading this novel that made me cry in a good way. But she'd be baffled by the 2 hours I spent reorganizing my email folders for the third time this month. Or the evening I spent hate watching a TV show I don't even like just because I was too tired to choose something else.
Hate watching. I do that too. It's like emotional junk food. You consume it even though it makes you feel worse. Fearless Me has started asking, is this adding anything to your life or just filling time before I turn on shows I don't actually want to watch?
And what's the answer usually? Honestly, sometimes I'm just filling time because being alone with my thoughts feels too intense. But Fearless Me has been experimenting with what happens if I sit with the intensity instead of numbing it with mediocre entertainment.
What happens?
Sometimes nothing dramatic. I just feel restless for a while and then the feeling passes. But sometimes I get these moments of clarity about what I actually want to do with my evening, or I remember a friend I want to call, or I get motivated to work on that short story I've been avoiding because I'm afraid it'll be terrible.
Fear of creating something terrible versus fear of creating nothing at all. Dead me would definitely choose terrible creation over perfect inaction.
Yes, Fearless Me keeps reminding me that bad art is still more interesting than no art. Like, I wrote this poem last week that's probably objectively awful, but writing it taught me something about how I actually feel about my job that I hadn't admitted to myself before.
What did you learn?
That I don't hate my job. I hate how small I make myself at my job. I spend all day trying to be invisible and efficient instead of bringing any creativity or personality to what I do. The poem was basically me arguing with myself about whether it's safer to be overlooked or scarier to be seen.
And which conclusion did you reach?
That being overlooked feels safer in the moment, but scarier in the long term, because you can disappear from your own life without anyone noticing, including yourself.
Oh God, that hits hard. I think that's what my death practice is really about, making sure I notice my own life while I'm living it, instead of sleepwalking through it and only realizing what I missed when it's too late.
Exactly. And my fearless self-experiments are about the same thing, just from a different angle. Instead of imagining what I'd regret, I'm imagining what I'd celebrate about myself if I was brave enough to try.
What would you celebrate?
That's a good question. I think I'd celebrate the fact that I'm curious about so many things, even if I don't pursue most of them. Like, I wonder about learning languages and trying rock climbing and taking cooking classes and volunteering at the animal shelter and a dozen other things. But I tell myself I don't have time or money or whatever. Fearless Me would probably just try one of them and see what happens.
Which one calls to you most?
The animal shelter, actually. I've been walking past it for 2 years thinking someday I should volunteer there. But someday never comes because I'm afraid I'll be bad at it or say the wrong thing or not know what to do with sad animals.
What would dead you think about that fear?
Dead me would probably be like, you are worried about being awkward around animals? Animals don't care if you're socially competent. They just care if you're kind.
So maybe this weekend, Fearless You and Dead Me could team up and get regular you to walk into that animal shelter and ask about volunteering.
Maybe they could. What about you? What's one thing dead you keeps telling you to do that living you keeps avoiding?
Call my brother. We had this stupid fight 6 months ago about something I can't even remember clearly now, and we've both been too proud or stubborn to reach out first. Dead me is like, what if one of you dies tomorrow? Will this argument have been worth losing your last months of being siblings?
That's a pretty compelling argument from dead you. What would fearless you add to that?
Fearless me would probably say, what's the worst that could happen if you apologize? He stays mad? Well, he's already mad, so you haven't lost anything. But what if he's been wanting to apologize too and is just waiting for permission?
Right, the risk of rejection versus the possibility of reconnection. When you put it like that, the math seems pretty obvious.
Pulls out phone. You know what? I'm going to text him right now before I can talk myself out of it. Just something simple like, I miss talking to you, and see what happens.
Watching her type. And I'm going to look up the volunteer application for the animal shelter as soon as I get home. Fearless me and dead you make a pretty persuasive team.
Hit send. Done. Oh God, I immediately want to unsend it, but dead me is reminding me that being vulnerable is better than being right.
How do you feel?
Terrified and relieved at the same time, like I just jumped off a cliff but remembered I have wings halfway down.
That's a beautiful metaphor. I'm going to remember that for when I fill out the volunteer application. Remember you have wings halfway down.
You know what's funny? We started this conversation with me talking about practicing death and you talking about pretending to be fearless, but we both ended up in the same place, trying to live more authentically and intentionally.
Maybe that's what all our weird coping mechanisms are really about. Whether we're imagining our deathbed or our most confident self, we're trying to get perspective on what actually matters versus what we think is supposed to matter.
Right. And both approaches seem to lead to the same conclusion, that most of our fears are smaller than we think, and most of our excuses are just habits we can choose to break. Phone buzzes. Is that your brother? Checks phone, smiles. I miss talking to you too. Want to get coffee this weekend? See? Fearless me was right. He was probably just waiting for permission to reconnect.
That's amazing! And now I definitely have to follow through on the animal shelter thing, because if you can heal a 6-month sibling rift with one text, I can fill out a volunteer application.
Here's to dead me and fearless you, and to the realization that most of the things we avoid are exactly the things we should run toward.
And to the strange ways we find courage, sometimes by imagining we're dying, sometimes by pretending we're not afraid, but always by remembering that we're more capable of living authentically than we give ourselves credit for.
Perfect. Now let's go live our lives on purpose for a while and see what happens.